Giulio Cesare in Egitto by George Friedrich Handel. Now you probably have some idea of what the title of this work is all about. Cesare looks like the typical misspelling of Caesar in English. Giulio Cesare sounds like Julius Caesar. In means in, believe it or not. And the word Egitto sounds like the beginning of a country. It is in fact Egypt. Taken together it means Julius Caesar in Egypt, and this is a very famous story from classical history. Notice that I have provided you with a date of composition for this work. It was written in 1724, and it was therefore written during the period in which Handel focused on writing Italian operas in England, the 1720s through the early 1740s. The fact that I've gone out of my way to point this out to you should suggest that this bit of information is somehow important. Speaking of important, the very subject of this opera is important to classical history, and so since it deals with a story from ancient Rome, it is therefore classical, the typical subject matter for 17th and 18th century serious operas. The story of the opera focuses on one of the most glamorous and intriguing episodes in the life of Julius Caesar, the time that he actually spent in Egypt. And he found himself in Egypt because of a revolution that had taken place in the ancient Roman Republic, a revolution that was intended to prevent him from returning to Rome. He returned to Rome anyway, and many of his former supporters who had conspired against him fled the country, and he went after them. And among those that he was pursuing was Pompey, his former father-in-law, someone who remained his friend after the death of his first wife, and someone whom he still considered to be a friend, and someone he hoped to bring back into the fold of the Roman Republic. When we take a look at the actual story itself, you'll see that things did not work out quite as he had planned. Let's take a look at the three main characters of one of the subplots of this rather intricate and complicated opera. Caesar went to Egypt to catch up with Ptolemy, one of his friends who had participated in the revolution against him. And when he arrived in Egypt, he found a country that was ruled by a 14-year-old boy whose name was Ptolemy and his older sister Cleopatra. All of you have heard the story of Julius Caesar and Cleopatra, but you probably haven't heard an awful lot about her younger brother. She and her brother were the co-rulers of the country of Egypt, and later on, in accordance with the custom of the dynasty from which they were born, they married and were man and wife. Not just brother and sister, but man and wife. Okay, give yourself half an hour to recover from that fact. Okay, back to the story. Caesar went to Egypt in pursuit of Pompey. Pompey arrived there well before Caesar. Ptolemy, the king of Egypt, promised to give him safe haven, but then he reconsidered his decision. He was afraid that if Julius Caesar got to Egypt and learned that he was harboring a fugitive, that Caesar might take it out on him. So, when Caesar arrived in Egypt, he was presented with a box from Ptolemy, which contained the head of Pompey. As you can imagine, Caesar was absolutely horrified. This is not what he was looking for, but it does set up what happens in this particular subplot in the opera. Among those who were not pleased that Pompey had been killed by Ptolemy was Cornelia, his wife. And to compound her troubles in the opera and in history as well, Ptolemy, a 14-year-old boy, had the hots for her. When we see her in the opera, we always find her being pried away from some instrument of death. Any dagger or sword she sees as an opportunity to end her life and her misery. She is a pathetic creature indeed. Another character who has just cause to have a grievance with Ptolemy is Sextus. Incidentally, the name Sextus has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with sex. It simply refers to a number, the number 6, just like the name Octavia refers to the number 8. Sextus was the son of Pompey, and he was bent on revenge for the death of his father and the imprisonment of his mother in a harem. We are going to examine one aria from within the opera, an aria entitled La Giustizia. The very sound of that word, Giustizia, gives you a hint to what it means. It means justice. This impressive composition is a typical da capo aria. And this is an aria of Sextus. Now, Sextus is a heroic masculine lead role in this opera, so therefore, in accordance with the custom of the time, it is written to be sung by a castrato. It is interesting to note that the part of Ptolemy, the boy king who murdered Pompey, is sung by a bass, a natural male voice type, whereas the part of Sextus, an aggrieved, heroic figure in the opera, one who is justifiably bent on revenge, is sung not by a natural voice type, a tenor or a bass, but by the castrato. Really, the castrato was considered the ideal voice type for heroic masculine lead roles. As a matter of fact, take a look at the portrait that you have at hand of one of the most famous castrati of the 18th century, a man whose stage name was Farinelli. And if you take a look at that portrait, you see that he's standing next to a harpsichord. And you will notice that he has his hand resting on that instrument. Now, a harpsichord is about 3 feet tall, and if you take a look at the trajectory of his arm, you see that it's almost straight down, and so you can estimate how tall he was. He was well over 6 feet tall, and in fact, castrati stood head and shoulders above typical people of their times. The castrato was both the ideal vocal type and the ideal physical type for heroic masculine lead roles in Baroque operas. Now let's examine your listening outline for this composition. The first thing that you will notice about the text of this aria is that it consists of 2 3-line stanzas. It's very, very short indeed. And although the title of this composition is Justice, and in fact justice is what is stated right at the very beginning of that song, the song is not at all about a quest for justice in the usual sense of the word. In fact, Handel recognized this when he set the work to music, and he writes long melismas, that is, long strings of notes, on 2 words that seem to contradict the title itself. One of them is vendetta, which means revenge, and traditor, which means traitor. Basically, Sextus is not really looking for justice, he is looking for revenge against a traitor. And when you listen to this composition, you will hear exactly what I described for you in the presentation on the Da capo aria, a concerto for the voice. The A section of the work presents you with a regular series of alternations between ritornello and solo section. The B section contrasts with it, in terms of accompaniment at least, and the final section, A prime, presents you with a spectacular array of ornaments and a nice cadenza improvised by the singer.